We haven't started yet. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I guess we can start. Students will keep joining. I can start with the introduction. So, hey everyone, thank you all so much for joining in this session. I'm sure it's going to be great and we're all going to be able to learn a lot. I'm Tanuja from YOCKET, and I would like to welcome everyone over here to the F1 visa awareness session. And it's going to be great, really excited, and really grateful for this opportunity to host this session. And I'm sure the students are excited as well. Um, so today we are going to be talking about awareness in the F1 visa in USA, of course. And we have some two very special people joining us. We have Leslie from the US consulate in Mumbai and Ryan from Education USA. Thank you so much for joining, taking the time out for us and for the students. So whenever you guys are ready, you can start with the presentation. And I'm your host. I'll be here. And please divert your questions in the chat. We'll be taking them towards the end, and we'll try to help you as much as possible, and hopefully this session can be productive for all of us. So can we go ahead now?
Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Gibson, and I am a visa officer at the U.S. consulate here in Mumbai. What that means is that I process visa interviews for thousands and thousands of students every year at the consulate in Mumbai. I'm joined by my colleague Ryan from Education USA, which is a partner that helps students prepare for their education in the United States. So he'll get us started with some information about studying in the US, how to apply to universities, and then I'll come in and talk to you about the visa application process. As mentioned, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end for both me and Ryan about visas and about generally studying in the United States. Okay, Ryan, over to you.
Sure. You want to go ahead and share the slide? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Pereira. I'm with Education USA. There are two sections to this presentation. I'm going to talk early on in the first part about the process of applying for higher studies in the US, and then Leslie will come in and talk specifically about applying for the visas, and then we'll take questions later on. Next slide. So the US currently has just under 1 million international students studying in the US, okay, at US colleges and universities. The US has and will continue to be a very sought-after destination for higher studies. Can you go to the next slide, Leslie? So what does this 1 million international students tell us about studying in the US? It tells us a couple of things. The first is that the US is the most sought after destination for higher studies in the US. And out of these 1 million international students studying at US universities, almost 200,000 of them are from India. So even amongst Indians, the US is a sought after destination for higher studies. And there are two aspects to this. It's not just that the US is a sought after destination for higher studies. What it also shows is that applying and being admitted to a US university is a lot easier than you might think. The process of applying is a very long process, but if you do things the right way, it can be the duration might be long, but the process can be very, very smooth. Next slide, Leslie. Leslie, that's the slides are not showing. Could you go full screen? Leslie. So why do people want to study in the US? I just mentioned there are 200,000 people studying in the US. Why do they want to study in the US? There are multiple reasons. The first reason I'm going to talk about is the flexibility of the education system. When we talk about the flexibility of the education system, we're talking about at the undergraduate level, people can take various courses across a wide range of fields. Whether you want to be a mechanical engineer or a computer scientist, you still have to take classes in the physical sciences, biology, business, humanities, social sciences. And then at the end of the second year, in your second year, you will decide which area you are going to major in. So that is, you get to sample all the different subjects, find out what's really interesting to you, and then decide what is really important to you. This flexibility is also seen at the graduate level. It's not as prevalent as it is at the undergraduate level, but it is there. And for graduate students, those pursuing master's programs in the US, here, while you're still applying to the Master's in Computer Science program, you still get the opportunity to take classes in other areas of engineering, or even sometimes other schools, the business school. So for example, if you're a computer scientist and you want to start your own business, a lot of universities will allow you to take classes in entrepreneurship or business studies. So that will give you the skills you need to pursue higher studies in the US, to be successful in your career. The other thing that we have is the choice. There are more than 4,000 different universities in the US. Okay? These universities could be public universities, private universities, liberal arts and science colleges, community colleges. Leslie, could you go full screen on the presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So no matter what it is you want to study, there's a college for you in the US. Just waiting for it to come.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be back in just a moment. Maybe she's just facing a short issue.
There we go. So no matter what it is you want to study, there's a university there in the US that offers that program for you. And as I mentioned, due to the flexibility, you have the freedom to explore a wide range of subjects. Next slide. So we've talked about the flexibility of the education system. We've talked about the choices. We also have the quality of the education system. Now, no matter what it is, which rankings you look at, or there are about 6 or 7 different rankings that look at universities worldwide. No matter which ones you look at, about 50% of the top 100 will be from the US. But the quality is not just about the rankings of the universities. The quality is talking about the education and the learning that you have and the resources that the universities will provide you. The resources are not just high quality labs or the lectures. They're also talking about actually the cohort, the other students that you have in your class. You're learning from them as well. So that quality, and they also have a very diverse faculty from all over the world. So all these things lead to a very high quality of environment for you to learn in. Okay? And then, since there are 4,000 universities in the US, there's a wide range in terms of the cost. There are some that are quite expensive, but you also have others that are quite affordable. Okay? So you should be looking at universities that are right for you in terms of the education, in terms of the skills you need, and in terms of your budget. And this value is not just in the cost of the tuition. Okay? You're getting additional value in terms of financial aid, in terms of real world experiences. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. As I mentioned, the US university campuses are very diverse. On a university, you could see people from 75 to 100 countries. So learning about how the world operates and learning about different cultures will help give you a leg up in your career. So there are lots of reasons why people might want to study in the US. Next slide. So all these things come together to inform you that applying and being admitted to a US university is easier than you might think. Okay? Next slide. So there are 4,000 plus US universities. How do you decide which one is right for you? You have to pick 8 to 10 or so universities to apply to. How do you decide that? So when we ask this question, a lot of students will say, which are the top 10 universities in my field? Or which are the ones that give the best financial aid or are most cost efficient? Or which ones have the best return on investment? What is the GRE required to be admitted? Okay, these are all very, very important aspects regarding the application process. But when it comes to choosing universities, the first thing you need to do is do a self-evaluation. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my career goals? Once you understand yourself, then you could think about what skills do I need for my career? And once you understand what skills you need for your career, then you could look at which programs will give me those skills, and finally, which universities. There are lots of criteria that one can use in choosing a university, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So there is education, facilities, the fees, the diversity, the location. All of these are criteria that one could use in choosing universities to apply to. Okay? And I want to tell you right now, it's really important that you do your own homework. Select universities that you think are right for you, and then you can run it by others. Okay? But that initial homework has to be done by you. You know yourself best. So put in the effort. It takes time, but do that effort, and you'll understand the value of that later on. Next slide. When it comes to the first point that we want to talk about is the education. Here you'll look at the academic programs, the school rank, the faculty who's teaching, what kind of research goes on, what is the admission rate. When we talk about admission rate, we are referring to if 100 people apply to the department, how many are admitted? Is it 6? Is it 20? Is it 50%? So what are your chances of getting in? The other aspect of the education of the university that you should focus on is what is the graduation rate. If 10 people start the graduate program, how many finish? And how many finish on time? So because that's going to be very relevant to what are your chances, how difficult is the program, will you be able to complete this rigorous program, and will you be able to complete it on time? So these are kind of parameters that you need to be thinking about when you're looking at universities. Okay, it's not just the rank of the university. You can use rankings, but if you're looking at rankings, there are 2 points that you should keep in mind. The first point is that all rankings are very subjective. And unless you understand what are the criteria that goes into a ranking, you won't really know whether that ranking is reflective of what's important to you. The second and far more important point is that in the US, there are no official rankings of US universities. So all the rankings you see are by publications. So keep that in mind. And further, when it comes to rankings, there are several schools, universities, that the philosophy is we are in the business of educating people. We are not in the business of self-promotion. And so they choose not to participate in rankings because all rankings are voluntary. So there are quite a significant number of universities that choose not to participate in rankings. And you would have seen in the news in the last year or so, several high-profile US universities are pulling, saying they're not going to participate in rankings anymore. Okay, so just because a school is not ranked doesn't mean it's bad. So that's why we always recommend that when you're looking at universities, you start doing your homework on your own, and then you can run those lists by an advisor, including Education USA. Next slide. Then, in addition to just the quality of the education, you should be looking at what is there for the students, what kind of resources that the universities provide to the students in terms of research. So, for example, if you're going for machine learning, is there a machine learning center on campus? Or especially if you're like graduate students, several university, the departments have what are called cluster hires. That means they'll hire several universities in one particular, several faculty in one particular area. So if you're interested in that area, you might want to be applying to that department because there are so many faculties in that area, in that particular area that you're interested in. So that's what you should be looking for. Then it's not just about being at a university and getting a great education. You have to have a balance, work-life balance. So what are the resources that the university provides you to have that recreation to help you stay focused on your studies? Okay, but have some time to yourself to relax. Do they have clubs? Do they have a cricket club? Do they have other clubs that you could utilize? What are the gym facilities that you could utilize to keep yourself in the best healthy? Then you can also look at transportation. One thing to note that in the US, the transportation is not, especially in most cities, transportation might not be as good as you might be used to in a large metropolitan like Mumbai or some Delhi. Okay? There is public transportation, and the distances can be quite large. So if you're living quite far away from the campus, will you have a regular bus service to take you back to your house late at night? What is the service like when it snows very heavily? Those are kinds of things to think about. There are several universities in the US that have their own bus service within the campus because the campuses are so large. So does the university that you're applying to, do they have that resources for you? And then you also think about the dining options. At US universities, they provide a wide range of dining options. So food should not be a problem for most people, okay? Because they have buffets that you could pick and choose what it is you want, especially if you're going to be eating in the dining halls. Otherwise, you'll be cooking your own food as a graduate student. Next slide. Then you have to think about, where is the school located? Is it near a relative? Is it in a big city or a small town? What is the weather like? Okay. Now, these points, a lot of people think about if a university is located in California, especially in the IT area, it'll be a good choice. I would say that's not the only aspect to keep in mind. If the pandemic has taught us one thing, it's taught us that people can work virtually. So you could be out in mid-Ohio and do your job. So why do you need to be located in California to be hired? Okay? So when you're looking at universities, the first thing is really about the quality of the education. The other things like relatives, the size of the city or the weather, they're important, but you can think about it, but don't make them the focus of your choice. For some people who cannot deal with the cold, then being somewhere down south might make more sense. But again, if you get a good jacket for $200, you could be saving $10,000 on tuition at some of the schools. So you can think about it, but don't just keep it as it has to be in a warm climate, things like that. Next slide. As I mentioned, the US universities are very, very diverse campuses. This diversity is not just found in the international student population, where on a big research university, you'll see people from 75 to 100 countries represented. This gives you a really good opportunity to learn about the world and how it operates. And that learning will take you far once you get into your career. And the diversity is not just found in the student body, it's also found in the faculty. You get faculty from all over the world. So you're learning from people with very different pedagogy styles. Okay? So that's what makes the US so appealing to international students. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about the fees. On average, it'll cost around $45,000 to $55,000 a year, tuition plus living. When we talk about cost, we always consider both the tuition plus the living. Okay? At a public university, the average cost is around $45,000 a year for a graduate program. And at the private university, the average cost is around $55,000 to $57,000. Now, these are averages. You can have a private university that's much more affordable, and you can have a public university that's more expensive. But keep that in mind. Okay? And this includes housing, the books, the insurance, the room and board, and the tuition, and the associated fees, lab fees, computer lab fees, and everything. Okay? So it might seem like it's quite expensive to study in the US, but there are ways to pay for it and to reduce cost. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Next slide. Okay. So how do you go about funding your US education? There are several ways in which you can fund your education. Next slide. The first is to get financial aid from the university. Now, as graduate students, almost more than 30% of graduate students tend to get some financial aid from the university. Now, this could be from a few $1,000s to a full scholarship. Okay? But graduate students, about 30% of them, or more than 30%, will usually get some financial aid. Then you have the scholarships, which are here's $5,000, just come to our university. You can use that scholarship for whatever you want. My organization is also the Fulbright Commission in India. So we do have some fellowships, especially for master's students with 3 years work experience in certain fields that can get up to $80,000 a year on, over 2 years on the Fulbright Nehru Master's Fellowship. So you could look into that, but we do need 3 years work experience. You can work on campus for up to 20 hours a week while college is on. So that usually helps pay for your living expenses. And finally, you could take an education loan either from a US or an Indian bank. So there are multiple ways to pay for your education. It's not just having the parents support you in this. Next slide. So this is giving you a glimpse of some of the opportunities that one has for fellowships and scholarships. So as I mentioned, the US government scholarships, which is the Fulbright Nehru Fellowships, which is jointly funded by both the Indian and the US governments. Then you have the university-specific scholarships. So for example, if a student is admitted to the University of Dayton, you can apply to the Dayton International Scholarship. Then we have the Indian business houses as part of their CSR have started putting their 2% of profits into funding for higher study, both in India and abroad. So some of the well-known ones are the J.N. Tata Trust for endowment, the K.C. Mahindra Trust, the Narottam Saxena, and the Sahu Jain Trust. There are others. So do your homework. Each of these will have different criteria and eligibility. So you need to plan well in advance to find out, are you eligible for these, and what is the application deadline, and what is the application process for these Indian scholarships. And then you have the international scholarships, such as the Rotary Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and others such like them. So do homework early on. First, have your budget, decide which universities, and then you start looking for which scholarships are available to meet the difference between what you can afford and what the university costs. Next slide. So now, as I mentioned, applying for higher studies in the US takes time. You have to start the process 12 to 18 months in advance. That's very, very different from the process of applying for higher studies in India and in most other countries. Okay? So why does it take so long? Next slide. We've got a little timeline here. You first start by thinking about, as I mentioned, do your self-evaluation. Why do I need higher studies? Why do I want to pursue this abroad, especially the US? Then you start thinking about which schools do I want to apply to? What programs do I want to apply to at those schools? Okay. Then once you have that idea, then you start narrowing down your list of universities to 8 to 10, and you take the exams, the GRE or the GMAT for the graduate students, or the SAT or the ACT exam for the undergraduate students. And then you also have to take the English exam for everybody, whether you're applying for grad or undergrad. You have to do either the TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo, or the Pearson's test of English. So check with the university that you're applying to, which English test they'll accept, and then prepare for that one accordingly. For the US, you have to send in your applications 8 to 10 months in advance. So if you're looking at August 2024, your application should be ready in November, December this year. Okay. Once you send in your applications, the US universities admission committees will review the applications between January and April, or sometimes even May. And after they review the application, they'll let you know whether you've been admitted, and if you've been admitted, have you been given any financial aid? And once you've been admitted and you've accepted the offer of admission, then they'll send you information on how to apply for the student visa. Next slide. And so now Leslie will take over and talk to you all about the process of applying for the visa. Go ahead,
Hi,
Leslie.
everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties on my side, having trouble sharing my screen, but hopefully you can all see it now. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the visa application process, which I know can be a kind of intimidating process for a lot of people, and there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about how it goes and how you can prepare for your visa interview. So it's easier than you think, and as long as you have prepared, and I'll talk about what that preparation can look like in a couple of minutes. So currently, student visas are one of the top priorities for the US mission to India. So in our embassy in Delhi and throughout all the consulates throughout India, we are focusing on student visas in addition to the other types of visas. We issued a record number of student visas in 2022. Just like Ryan said, there are almost 250,000 Indians studying in the United States. So you can tell that we're working really hard to get Indians studying in the US, and we are committed to making sure that visa appointments are available for them. I'll talk a little bit about the appointments and the way that we schedule them, but essentially we have student visa seasons. And so while it might seem like there's a really long wait time for student visas, that's not in fact the case. We open up student visa appointments during these student visa seasons, which means that when we know students are headed into their intake, we will open up visa appointments so that they can get there in time for their classes to start. One thing to note is if you have had a visa of any type before, and any type of non-immigrant visa. So for example, if you were on an H-4 dependent visa, if you were on a B-1, B-2 tourist visa, if you had any other type of visa, you can apply through the interview waiver program, which means that you may not have to appear for an in-person interview. And the wait time is generally shorter, and it's easier to get appointments for this type of visa waiver program. So if you have had a visa, make sure to check online to see if you're eligible to apply through the interview waiver program. So once you have been admitted to your university and you have selected the university that you want to attend, that this is your 100% certain you want to go to this university, this is the one that's for you, you want to request an I-20 form from the university. And this is a document that every student going to the United States from overseas has. It basically lists your program details, who your designated school official is, the start dates, and you will need to bring these forms to the visa interview. You cannot make an appointment without an I-20 form. After you've selected the university, received the I-20 form, you need to complete your online visa application. We call it a DS-160, so that will be a common term that you hear, or just a visa application. You'll have to pay two fees. One is the SEVIS fee, which is the fee that you pay to the United States that basically allows for electronic tracking of the international students that are in the United States. And then you also need to pay a separate visa application fee. Those are the only two visa fees that you will have to pay. We will never ask for an additional fee to get a sooner appointment. We will never ask for a fee to get your visa application processed more quickly. The only two fees, I'm just going to reiterate, that we will ask for is the SEVIS fee and the visa application fee. So after you've paid the fees, completed your application, you'll need two appointments. The first is a VAC, Visa Application Center appointment, also known as biometrics. This is where you go and you take your paperwork, you do your fingerprints, you have your photo processed, things like that. The second appointment is usually a couple of days or even the next day after that appointment, where it'll be a visa interview at the embassy and consulate that you've selected to attend your interview. So after you've made those appointments, the next thing you have to do is just attend your interview. So this is the part we get the most questions about. And I know this is the part that is the most intimidating about the visa application process, which is the interview. So the reality about the student visa interview here in India is that it will be very short. Students typically have 1 minute to 3 minutes to talk to a visa officer, not because we don't want to talk to you longer, but just because we need to make sure that lots of students can get their appointments. This means that you're going to have to be prepared for the interview. What that means is that you have to be able to talk about your program credibly. You have to be able to talk about how you will pay for your education. And you have to answer other questions about your interests, about your course curriculum, about why you selected that university, lots of different things related to your education. Be prepared to answer personal questions and be prepared to have a conversation. The number one mistake a student can do in the interview is to not tell the truth or to prepare a very rehearsed interview. What this means is that we hear very often students who have memorized an answer, they think the visa officer wants to hear. That is not what we want to hear. We want to hear the truth of why you selected the university that you did, why you selected the program. And we understand that there are many, many different reasons why a student might select a university. You might have selected the university because it's close to family in the United States, because it's the cheapest option for you, because it has the closest to your family and friends in the United States. So basically, you just need to be able to talk about your choice credibly to the officer. We have to determine that you meet the credible student standard, which means that you are prepared for your education, you have a credible plan to pay, and you plan to use your visa appropriately. What this means is that you are going to learn, not earn. Although there are options for on-campus employment and things like CPT and OPT, the primary purpose of a student visa is for a student to get an education. And so we need to understand that in the visa interview, you will be able to use that visa appropriately. So after you've had the interview, if the visa is approved, we'll keep your passport and you'll get it back in about 1 to 2 weeks. Typically, you'll receive an email or SMS that it's ready for pickup. It's usually done faster than a week, especially during student visa season. We want to get your passports and visas ready to you as soon as possible. So one of the things to remember is that if you are a first-time student visa applicant, please do not schedule your interview until you have your I-20 in hand. We don't want you to have to cancel your interview. We don't want you to have to move your appointment date around. So make sure that you have your I-20. And then that's when you can make your appointment. If you are traveling to the US on a student visa, it's important to understand that even if your visa is approved in, for example, June, you will not be admitted until 30 days before your start date. So if you start September 1st, you will only be admitted to the United States, which means you can enter the United States in August. You cannot come earlier. And that's a rule for international students everywhere. It's important to just check the vaccination status and whether or not you need a COVID test. Currently, we do not require COVID tests, but as you know, things can change very quickly. And so it's important to look at all the different regulations and vaccination requirements before you go into the United States. And I know that we're going to open up for questions, but I just want to address 2 questions quickly, which are our 2 most common visa application questions for students. So the first one is, I applied for a student visa, but I was refused. Can I apply again? The answer is that we are committed to trying to give everyone at least one chance to have a student interview before we open up appointments for students to come in for a second time. It doesn't mean that you will not have a chance. It just means that appointments for first-time students will be prioritized. That's why it's important to prepare for your first interview so that you don't need to interview a second time. If you were refused a student visa and you are applying again, it's important to demonstrate to the officer that something has changed in your circumstances. And what that means is that either there's been a change in your university acceptance, there's been a change in the reasons for choosing that university, you received a scholarship, or you changed your start dates. There has to be a demonstrated change in circumstances. If you just come with the same situation, it won't be a change in circumstances. The next one is, I received my university acceptance, but I can't see any F1 visa appointments. Like I mentioned before, we operate on student visa seasons, which means that we open up student visa appointments during those student visa massive seasons. So most students start in August and September, or in January, maybe early February. So we open up visa appointments for those students about 3 months, in the 3 months leading up to those start dates. If you receive your acceptance from a university very early, for example, you receive your dream university admit in February, you might not see a visa appointment until we officially start student visa season, which is typically around May and June. For the winter intake cycle, which is going to be pretty soon, that's for January start date students, we are opening up student visa appointments in November and December and January. If you are applying for a university outside of those core student visa season months, know that it might be a little bit more difficult to get an appointment because we typically have 2 official student visa seasons. Okay, so I'm happy to open it up to questions. Ryan will be able to answer questions about applying to university, and I'm happy to open it up to visa questions if you have anything specifically you'd like to ask.
Sure,
Please
yes.
unmute, Tanuja. Okay.
Yeah, we have an audience on YouTube as well. There's a lot of people on YouTube. And guys, I would just like to say that more generic questions would be better and easier to answer. If you guys ask extremely specific questions, then it would be a longer and harder. So please put your questions in the chat box. And I do have a few written down as well over here. So we can start with them. Yeah, so this is a question about visa. So is there any difference between a visa rejection and a visa refusal?
That's a good question. There's no real difference between a refusal and rejection. We say that they're officially it is a 214B refusal. So it's not a rejection. That's just another word for a refusal. But the technical term that we use officially is a refusal.
Okay, thanks for that. Is it beneficial to choose a consulate with a lower rejection rates for the F1 visa interviews?
Okay, so this is a good question and one we hear a lot in India because we have so many consulates. So all of us who do visa interviews, we're all trained in DC at the same place for the same kind of criteria. We all receive the same information about universities, about different types of students that we see. So there's really no reason to choose a different consulate. We encourage you to choose the consulate that is closest to you, that is the most conveniently located, and the one that you can get an appointment to the easiest. You won't have a better chance or a worse chance applying at a consulate outside of your visa district. We do understand that because appointments are harder to get, if you're from, for example, Calcutta, but you don't have an appointment available there, you might come to Mumbai. We understand that, and we don't see that as something negative. We just see that as the reality of the fact that it's difficult to get appointments in India.
Right. Okay, we've got a question. I think Ryan will be able to answer this. Is how important is university ranking for masters?
As I mentioned, one can always consider the rankings of universities while you're looking for master's programs, but it's really important to have a much better nuanced understanding about just because a university is highly ranked doesn't mean it's right for you. It's always about picking universities that are right for you. And when we talk about right for you, we're talking about, does it offer the specific courses you're looking to pursue? What are your chances of getting in? What are your chances of being successful at that university? What is the affordability factor? What is the environment of the university? Will you be happy and have a reasonable chance of success? And what happens to students after they graduate? Those are some of the things you should be looking at rather than just the ranking of the university. Let me put it another way. Say you're admitted to one of the very elite colleges, okay? You get there, everybody's very happy, and then you find out that you're in the bottom 10% of your class. How will that make you feel? Will you work harder to get better, or will you slide into a depression? So those are kinds of things you know yourself best. And that's why it's really important that you take the initiative to search for universities that you think are right for you. You can then run that list by EduSA and others to get their opinions.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is a question. What happens when an application has been deferred? How does the visa process work then?
Okay, so Ryan can probably talk about the deferral process in terms of university side. For the visa application process, it just means that you would be applying in a later season. So for example, if you were deferred admission for a university that started in August and it was deferred to January, you would now be applying in a different student visa season. So maybe you'll get an appointment in November versus getting it for the different summer intake. It's not a negative thing. We understand that there are many reasons for people to defer admissions, family reasons, personal reasons, job reasons. So it's just important that if you, for example, received your university admit in August originally, and you plan to defer, that you need to come with an updated I-20 to your visa interview. We need to see the most current information. It can't be an old I-20. We can't have any old information when you come to the visa interview. And I'll just add one thing to what Ryan said about university rankings. When you're talking to the visa officer about why you selected a university ranking, or why you selected university, ranking is not a very good answer, because we know, as people who have studied in the US, who've gone to US universities, that rankings can differ across the board. So I went to a university that was ranked very, very high in research and medicine and biotechnology, but it was ranked very low in the social sciences. And so it really depends on what you're studying and what that university is good for. If ranking is important, you have to say why it's important to you. Like #1 ranked in public research university, that's a good fact, but why is that important to you? Is it important because you want to do research yourself, or is that just a statistic that you memorized? The memorized answer is never a good answer. The real answer behind our question is the one that will help us understand you as a student.
Right then, we can take it. Would you like to speak about that a little bit, Ryan? About the deferral?
So the deferrals could occur for two reasons. The first could be that the US university, the department, has admitted way too many students that they could have in their class. And so in that case, they want you to come to the university, but they just don't have the space. So in such a situation, they will request that we can't have you right now. Can you come in spring? So that would be the university deferring the admission to the spring. The second aspect is due to a change in your situation, family emergency or something, or a personal choice. You think that you might want to continue your job for a few more months to get more experience before you go to the US. In that case, you have to request to the US university that, hey, I want to delay coming to the university. I'm still coming, but I want to delay it, and give them the reason why you want to delay it, and then see whether they're willing to defer the admission and then have you come in later. So with the deferment, if the university is deferring it because they've taken a lot of students, then you have to decide whether you want to do that or not. And if the second situation where you are deferring the admission, then you have to wait for the university to give permission that yes, they are okay with you deferring it before you can make that final call.
Right. So the next question is, how recent should a bank statement be for an I-20?
Ryan, I'll let you take that. After, I'll just mention one thing, is that in the visa interview, we are not looking at documents except for the I-20 and SEVIS fee receipt. So you can bring bank statements, you can bring acceptance letters, you can bring all of these things, but do not be surprised if we do not ask for documents during the interview. Like I mentioned, we don't have a lot of time to interview you, and the most important thing besides the I-20 is the conversation that we're having. So bank statements are less important for the visa interview, but they're a little bit more important when you're talking to your university about how you'll fund the education. So Ryan, I'll let you comment on that.
Thanks, Leslie. So as I mentioned, between the months of January and April, the US universities are going to review your applications and let you know whether you've been admitted. And if you've been admitted, then the university will say, congratulations, you've been admitted to our university. Now you have to show proof that you can pay for the first year's education and living expenses. And so they will require some documentation from your part with showing that you can afford the first year's education. Now, as to the date of what the bank statements are, each university could have their own acceptance. In fact, within departments within a university, you could have differences. So it's really important to interact once you've been admitted. Say, okay, I've been admitted, I'm very interested. Is there any specifics with regard to the dating of the bank letter, things like that? So have that communication. Understand that in the US, each of those 4,000 plus universities operate independent of one another. So they each get to set their own rules. So it's important to find specific requirements for the university that you've been admitted to.
Okay, we can move on to the next question. If I apply for the visa with the I-20 of one university and then get my admit from my dream university in the meantime, would I be able to change the I-20 to my preferred university?
So in terms of changing your I-20, you'll have to get a new I-20 from the university. It's important to note that you can't have multiple active I-20s. The SEVIS fee that you pay comes with a unique ID that is associated with one university. So you can't have multiple I-20s and then just choose whichever one you want. You have to select the university to get the I-20. So most universities will not issue multiple. So if they see that you're admitted and accepted to one university, they'll ask that you transfer your SEVIS fee to the new university before issuing an I-20. If you have applied for a visa, say you apply in June for a visa for one university, and then your dream university admits you in July, you can apply through the interview waiver program because you've already had an interview and you have a valid visa. That is one way to make sure you don't have to apply for an actual in-person interview. We do recommend that you come in either for an interview or an interview waiver to get a new visa if you have changed universities. That's because a visa is just a ticket to knock on the door of the United States. It's not a ticket to get into the United States. So when you go into the United States, just like we come into India and you have to go through immigration, my colleagues in immigration will look at your I-20, look at your visa, and see that there are two different names of the university, and they'll ask you why that is. So we always recommend that your visa reflects the university you've chosen to go to, rather than the one that you got the earliest admit. So that's why it's really important to not just make an appointment for the first I-20 that you get. If you really want to go to a certain university, you should apply for the visa for that university. We understand that circumstances change and sometimes your dream university will admit you later. But it's really important that when you come into the United States and you go through immigration, that you're able to talk to the immigration official about the discrepancy, if there is any.
Right. We have a lot of questions coming in from YouTube. So can you change your university after the visa stamping?
So I think that I just answered that, but you can change the university after the visa stamping, but I do recommend that you try to get another visa for the correct university. And if you are not able to, if your start date is too close, you'll just need to be able to explain that to the immigration official upon entering the United States. But we do understand that circumstances change. So it is important just to make sure that you're on top of your university admits. And I know Ryan would agree with me when I say this. This is why it's important to apply early. Last minute applications mean last minute visa interviews. And the later you wait in the process, the less likely it'll be that you can start your university on time, that you'll get the visa appointment on time. So if you start during that timeline that Ryan mentioned, months and months in advance, then you'll be fine. You'll be able to go through the process in a very organized way, and you'll be able to have your visa in time.
Right. Okay. Next question is, can one apply for an F1 without affecting their EB2 process?
So you can apply for multiple visas. I'm only here to talk about F1 visas, so I'm not sure about the specifics of the other visa, but you can apply for multiple visas. You'll have to understand that in the visa interview, you might have to answer questions about that visa application.
And I guess there's a question for Ryan. How much does it matter if your university is in a smaller or larger city? What's its impact?
That's a really good question. It really depends on your personal choice. The smaller city will have a more of a community aspect to it, where you know people living in and around where you are. The cost of living usually is much lower. The large city has more resources, big airports, easier to commute. But it also comes at a cost of higher cost of living. So you have to decide what's really important to you in deciding where you want to pursue your studies. Personally, whether it's a big city or a small city, I think the focus should be on the quality of the education that you're going to receive at the university. That should be first and foremost in your decision and you deciding where to pursue your education. Some people will say being in a big city has more opportunities after you graduate. Maybe true, but how you network and get yourself out there, whether you're in a small city or not, if you're good at networking and if you're good at putting yourself out there, you should be fine.
Right. Okay. Our next question is, do well-known universities make it easier to get a visa?
So the answer is no. We are not evaluating your application based on which university you're going to. We're evaluating your visa application based on how you can explain that to us. So if you got into an Ivy League university and we ask you the question, why did you choose this university? And you can't answer that, then you're probably not going to get the visa. So it really has nothing to do with the university. It has to do with how you explain it. So my colleagues and I, all of us went to different universities for different reasons. I went to a large university with 50,000 people. My brother went to a university with 1,800 people. And so we both went for different reasons. And so all of us visa officers know that the reason for selecting a university is more important than the university itself, because all of us represent those different universities and different types of institutions. So my best advice is to make sure that you are familiar with the university and not just the things you can read on the website. Why did you select this university? Is it close to people that you know? Did you have a friend who went there? Did it offer you a large scholarship? We're not going to look at the name of the university and decide accept or refuse. That's not how it happens. We ask questions to make sure that you can articulate why you selected that university. So that's my best advice, is make sure that you're honest about the reasons for choosing it and that you can explain beyond the memorized answers that you might have heard online. That's one thing I want to reiterate, is that we do not want to hear memorized answers about certain things that you may read on a message board or Telegram groups about what to say to a visa officer. If you're me, you talk to 100 students per day, you can hear when someone has memorized an answer and you can hear when someone has a genuine answer. So that's the best advice I can offer, is be genuine, have a conversation. And honestly, that's the easiest thing to do, is to have a normal conversation with another person. We're human too, and we just want to hear what's behind the student. We want to get to know you in the short time that we have with you.
Right. So we'll just be taking a couple of more questions as we are coming towards the end. I know there are a lot of questions coming in from YouTube and on the chat as well. Thank you, everyone. But we can only take so many questions. Our next question is, should one decide on the accommodation before landing in the US, as sometimes it has been asked at the immigration?
That's a really good question. Now, let me take that, Leslie. So once you've been admitted and you have your visa, Education USA has a series of events to get you ready for life on a US campus. So I would look out for those. With regard to this specific question about accommodation, while they may ask where you're going to stay, it's not really that important that you have a very specific address that you've already rented out. Okay. I would always recommend that students should go to the campus, see the apartments for themselves before deciding where they want to stay. It's like saying, okay, I'm in Mumbai, I'm going to be doing my education in Nagpur. Let me rent an apartment in Nagpur without even seeing it. Who would do that? If you're in a cold climate, you've got to check and see whether the heater works. Is it safe? Is it walkable? How close is it to the university? So those are kinds of things to look at, not just I need it because somebody may ask me a question about it. Leslie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can add from personal experiences that I agree with you, Ryan, that it's important to look at where you're going to be staying rather than the actual address. You usually have to make arrangements before you get there just so you have a place to stay your first few weeks. But many universities offer either short-term housing or dormitory options for international students, at least the first semester, if not the first year. So those are always good options living on campus. If you have friends that you know who go to that university and they have recommendations, those are good ways to find it. But you will need to talk about your general circumstances of what you're going to be doing in the US when you come into the port of entry. So for example, if the immigration officer asks you when you arrive to the US, where are you going, and you can't tell them where, then that's a problem. But if you say, oh, I'm going to the dorm at my university, that's a perfectly good answer. You don't have to have the exact address memorized, but you do need to be able to explain what your plan is when you get to your university.
Okay, we'll be taking our last question. Does having a visitor US visa make it easier to get a student visa?
So I did mention earlier the interview waiver program, which means that if you've had a visa before and you have not been refused a visa most recently, then you can apply through the interview waiver, which means that you can get a student visa without coming in for an in-person interview most of the time. There are exceptions, of course. So it doesn't necessarily make it easier to get a student visa. You still have to meet all of the criteria, but it does mean that you might not have to come in for a student visa interview. What we do look at is the totality of circumstances. So we look at the students as a whole. We know that the US is very, very far away from India, and that not everyone has had an opportunity to travel to the US. So if you haven't been to the US, that's not a negative against you. We're not looking at that. We're not only giving people student visas who have been to the US or been to other countries. We understand that for many students, going to the US is the first time they will ever have left India. And so we do understand that as students and as young people, it's a little bit more difficult to travel internationally. And I'll just make one more comment before the end, because I've seen a few questions about finances in the chat. And I know that this is a big question that people have. So like I said, we're not looking at bank statements in the visa interview. We are asking questions about how you will pay for your university. Like I mentioned before, we have all been to university in the US. All of the people interviewing you know how expensive it is. We know what it's like to take out a student loan. We know what it's like to apply for scholarships. So the important thing is that you are just able to tell us how you are going to pay for it. There's no right way to pay for a US education. If you're receiving family loans, if relatives in the US are helping you pay for it, if your grandparents gave you money, if you're taking a scholarship, or if you are working a year in India to save up for your visa or for your education, those are all correct answers. You just have to be able to explain it.
Yes, thank you for taking that question. To end this, would you just give us some absolute red flags and green flags in US visa interviews?
Okay. So I'll start with the green flags. The green flag is that a student is comfortable and is ready to have a conversation, is answering questions honestly, is able to talk about why they're excited to study in the US. We understand that students are nervous. We understand that it's a very intimidating process. So you don't have to be, we know that you won't feel completely at ease. We know that you'll be a little nervous, but the important thing is that you are prepared to have a conversation, and you're prepared to tell the visa officer the real reasons why you selected a university and what you're excited about. The red flags, like I've mentioned a couple times, coming with a very memorized speech, coming with memorized answers, coming with the same answers that many, many other people will also have, that don't let us see who you are or why you selected that university. Remember that a memorized answer is not unique. It means that it's the same answer for this university, that university. It can apply to any of the 4,000 different institutes in the United States. And the number one most important thing is to just tell the truth. We understand that students have different circumstances. There is no one size fits all for a student. And so we understand that every student will be different and every answer will be different. So the important thing is to tell the truth.
Right, of course. Okay, I'd like to end this session by saying thank you so much for being here, for giving such sound and good advice to the students. I'm sure they've learned a lot from this session, and it's been great talking to you, and it's been great. Thank you everyone for joining from YouTube as well, and everyone over here. Your questions, hopefully they've been answered, and I'd just like to say this has been great. And we all at YOCKET, we host events very frequently, and they're very informative, they're very good. So anyone looking to get any more advice regarding education, please do go to our event page and do look at the events we host and do look at the sessions. So that's been Tanuja and Leslie and Ryan. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you at the next event, students.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
You too.